I still remember the smell of the flowers that afternoon, a sweetness so thick it almost covered the taste of humiliation. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon, so you never miss a story like this one. They'd chosen a private estate in Connecticut, a place that looked like money had been poured straight into the soil. I parked my old Ford in a sea of imported cars, each one glinting like a mirror of everything I'd never been. The valet hesitated before taking my keys. The kind of pause that tells you a man has already measured your worth. Inside, chandeliers glittered like frozen lightning. The air hummed with the soft laughter of people who'd never worried about a mortgage. And in the middle of it all stood my daughter, radiant, unreachable, my own flesh and blood, moving through the crowd as if she'd been born among them. Her gown shimmered when she turned. For a heartbeat, our eyes met across the ballroom. And then she looked away. The wedding planner approached, headset, clipboard, perfect smile. "Thomas," she said, scanning her list, "you're at table 19. Table 19. By the kitchen doors, near the buzz of compressors and the clatter of dishes. The table for people you must invite but don't want anyone asking about." I nodded because sometimes silence keeps a man's dignity intact longer than words ever could. From there, I watched the life I'd paid for unfold like a movie I wasn't allowed to star in. 300 guests, a string quartet, champagne towers that caught the light like glass fire. Every detail chosen, every expense covered. By me. 6 months of invoices, contracts, transfers. $500,000 worth of love boxed and bowed for a daughter who no longer spoke my name. Then it happened. She drifted toward the stage, arm in arm with a man I'd never seen before. Silver hair, tuxedo cut sharp enough to slice pride. She smiled at him the way little girls once smiled at their fathers. When the MC asked who would give the bride away, she said softly, "My father." And the man beside her stepped forward, laughter, applause, cameras flashing. The word father hit me like a nail driven slowly into wood. I kept my face still. Men like me learn early how to hide pain. It's the only luxury we can afford. Dinner began. Waiters poured wine worth more than a month's wage. At my table, cousins made small talk, unaware of the storm behind my polite nods. I raised my glass to my lips, but the champagne tasted like rust. For 26 years, I'd given everything I had. Late nights, cracked hands, missed birthdays. I'd built a plumbing and property business from nothing but debt and calluses. And through it all, every decision I made was to keep her safe, to give her a world I'd never known. Now she was living in it, and I was the ghost she'd edited out. When the speeches began, her new family took turns describing her journey, the sacrifices she'd made, the mentorship of that silver-haired stranger. Each lie landed soft and elegant, wrapped in gratitude. I watched her beam beneath the chandeliers, her smile a mask of porcelain and distance. A waiter slipped a folded note beside my plate. Final balance due before 9 p.m. I checked my watch. 7:45, the checkbook in my jacket pocket felt heavy like a stone pressing against my ribs. One signature stood between their perfect illusion and the truth that paid for it. I looked at the man they called father. His cufflinks caught the light. Small diamonds, old money quiet. He had the air of someone who'd never lifted anything heavier than a promise. My hands, by contrast, bore the story of everything I'd built. Scars that ran like fine cracks across the skin, proof that work leaves its mark. Across the room, my daughter's laughter rang out. Bright, rehearsed, brittle. She didn't see me watching, maybe she couldn't. People talk about heartbreak as if it's loud, tears, shouting, dramatic exits. They don't understand that real heartbreak is silent. It sits in your chest like a weight, and the only sound is the quiet decision of what you're going to do about it. I could have left right then, driven home, written it off as the price of loving someone who'd outgrown her roots. But as I reached for my coat, I saw the wedding planner glance nervously toward me, checking her watch, whispering to a colleague. The room might have belonged to them, but the contracts still belong to me. Some debts aren't paid with money. Some lessons you can't buy twice. So I stayed seated at table 19, watching the glow of chandeliers flicker across half-empty plates. Waiting, thinking, deciding. Because tonight, under all that glitter, someone was going to learn what love truly costs. The morning after the wedding, I woke up before the sun. Old habits. When you've spent a lifetime chasing daylight to finish jobs before the rain hits, sleep becomes something you borrow, not own. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee cooling beside me and thought about beginnings. How all the biggest things in life start small enough to fit in your hands. My first business wasn't much. Just a second-hand toolbox and a beat-up van I bought for $600. I was 34, newly married, a baby on the way, and one broken water heater away from bankruptcy. But I told myself I'd rather fail building something of my own than succeed working for someone else. Those early years taught me that dignity doesn't come from what you do. It comes from how you do it. I'd crawl under old houses, fix frozen pipes with fingers so numb they bled, then drive home smelling of copper and rust. My wife used to meet me at the door with a towel and that half-tired, half-proud smile. She'd say, "Someday she'll understand what you're building for her." She meant our daughter. Back then she was just a bundle wrapped in pink cotton, asleep against her mother's chest while I filled out invoices by hand. I remember carrying that little girl on my shoulders while patching a client's roof. She'd point at the clouds and tell me which ones looked like castles. I told her we'd build one of our own someday. Maybe that's where it all started. This idea that comfort meant leaving behind the dirt that built it. Years passed. Jobs grew bigger. I learned how to bid contracts, manage crews, buy properties that other people had given up on. One leaky building at a time, I turned rust into revenue. By the time she was in high school, the business had a real office, 3 trucks, and my name painted on every side. She used to wait in the lobby after class doing homework while I finished paperwork. One night she asked, "Daddy, will I ever have to work as hard as you do?" I told her I hoped not. That was my mistake. When you make things too easy for your children, they start thinking easy is normal. I paid for her private school because she cried about the kids teasing her for wearing thrift store shoes. I paid for college because I wanted her to sit in rooms where opportunity spoke fluent money. And when she graduated and couldn't find a job, I paid for the apartment so she wouldn't have to come back home embarrassed. Every check felt like love written in numbers. Still, distance crept in quietly. Calls turned into texts. Texts turned into silence. When we did talk, she'd correct my grammar, tell me to stop calling clients ma'am because it sounded too small town. I laughed it off, told myself she was just finding her way. But somewhere between those phone calls and that wedding invitation, she stopped seeing the calluses on my hands as proof of care and started seeing them as proof that she'd outgrown me. The last job I took before her engagement nearly broke me. A city water main had collapsed at midnight, flooding half a block. I spent 36 straight hours in freezing mud patching pipes while crews pumped the street dry. When I finally got home, I found an envelope waiting on the counter, her engagement announcement. Gold letters, embossed edges, and a photograph so perfect it almost looked airbrushed. Her smile was the same one she'd worn as a child, only now it belonged to a stranger standing beside her. That night I went out to the garage, looked at the framed photos hanging above my workbench. The first truck, the first office, her first dance recital. I realized every memory I'd built was measured in things that required effort, while every dream she chased demanded ease. Maybe it wasn't her fault. Maybe I'd built the wrong kind of foundation. You can teach a child how to earn money, but if you don't teach them how to honor where it came from, the wealth just becomes another disguise. By sunrise, I'd finished a pot of coffee and made a decision. If the world she wanted required pretending I didn't exist, then I'd stop pretending I was blind to it. Because a father doesn't just build houses and businesses, he builds truth. And when that truth is buried under silk and champagne, he digs it back up, no matter how deep it's been buried. There isn't a day when distance arrives all at once. It creeps in. One missed call at a time, one unanswered message, one change in tone that you almost don't notice, until silence becomes the new normal. It started after college. She moved to New York, chasing a job that barely paid but sounded impressive enough to tell strangers. I helped her pack, carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs, fixed the leaky faucet in that shoebox apartment before driving home alone through the night. She hugged me quick before I left, not the kind of hug that means I'll miss you, but the kind that says you can go now. For the first few months, she called every Sunday. We'd talk about her work, her friends, how expensive everything was. I didn't mind footing the bill, I just liked hearing her voice. Then the calls turned shorter, then texts instead of calls, then nothing. When I finally did hear from her, it wasn't her voice I recognized. It was a tone, polished, careful, like every word had been checked for grammar before leaving her lips. She'd gone from Dad to "Hey, Thomas." The first time she said my name like that, I let it slide. The second time, it landed like a verdict. I told myself she was just trying to sound professional. Maybe the city does that to people, makes them trade warmth for presentation. A year later, she invited me to a dinner with her new boyfriend. I drove 6 hours straight, cleaned up at a gas station bathroom, put on a shirt that didn't smell like work. They met me at a restaurant where the cheapest dish cost more than I used to make in a week. He wore a suit that fit too well for someone that young. When he shook my hand, he looked past me, like my presence was part of a performance, not the point of it. The conversation felt like a job interview I hadn't applied for. She kept glancing between us, her smile tight, her laugh a second too late every time I mentioned work. When the waiter brought the check, I reached for it automatically. Habit, I guess. Her boyfriend chuckled. "Please, Thomas, I've got it covered." Thomas. He said it like it was a polite downgrade. On the drive home, I kept thinking about that laugh, about the way my daughter didn't correct him. By the time I pulled into the driveway, something in me had settled. Not anger, not yet. Just a quiet knowing that something precious was slipping away. Over the next 2 years, I watched her build a life I wasn't part of. Social posts of rooftop dinners, charity events, vacations, each caption carefully curated. Grateful for everything my mother taught me about resilience. My name never appeared. Her mother had passed when she was 16. I'd raised her alone, but online I was already gone. One evening, a client's wife showed me a magazine article. Women of the future, the faces of modern success. There she was, my daughter. In the interview, she talked about growing up with limited resources, raised by a single mother who taught me independence. She'd rewritten history, and I was the chapter she'd edited out. I stared at that page until the words blurred, then I folded it and tucked it into my coat pocket. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I couldn't quite throw it away. Not yet. I tried to call her that night. No answer. Next morning, I got a message. "Can we please not talk about the past? It's complicated." Complicated. That's what people call shame when they're too polite to name it. Months turned into years. We spoke mostly through polite updates. Birthdays, holidays, the occasional text that said, "Hope you're doing well." Then one day, an invitation arrived in the mail. Thick paper, gold edges, her handwriting on the envelope. I opened it with hands that already knew what it meant. A wedding. The embossed letters shimmered under the kitchen light. Her name intertwined with a man's surname I didn't recognize. At the bottom, a note in her handwriting. "Please come. But please, let's keep things simple. No business talk, no mention of work. Just enjoy the day." No mention of work, the thing that built her future. The thing that bought her education, her apartment, every single step that led her to this golden invitation. I read that line again and again. Then I folded the paper neatly, placed it beside my coffee, and sat in silence for a long time. A father doesn't stop loving his child just because she's ashamed of him. But love, without respect, starts to rot, and once it does, it never smells the same again. So I marked the date on my calendar, circled it in red, and whispered to myself, not in anger, but in final acceptance. "All right then, you want simple? I can do simple." That circle on the calendar became a countdown, not to a wedding ceremony, but to a reckoning. It's strange how a piece of paper can weigh more than a lifetime of work. That invitation sat on my kitchen table for days. Gold-foiled, heavy stock, the kind that whispers wealth when you touch it. I'd look at it every morning, read her name written in looping cursive, and feel something tighten in my chest. Not anger, not even sadness. Something heavier, like grief that hadn't found its shape yet. I kept telling myself I should be happy. My little girl was getting married. That's supposed to mean pride, right? But pride feels different when you know you're being invited for appearance, not belonging. Her message echoed in my head. No business talk, no mention of work. She'd written it like a boundary. Polite, controlled, final. To her, my work wasn't a story worth telling. It was a stain that might show on her white dress. That Sunday, I drove down to the hardware store. Needed bolts for a boiler job, but mostly I needed noise, people, something to drown out that silence waiting for me at home. The guy at the counter asked if I was taking a vacation soon. I said no, just a wedding. He laughed, said, "Your own or someone else's?" I said, "That's a good question." When I got back, the mail was piled high. Bills, flyers, and one envelope marked final invoice. I knew what it was before I opened it. The venue deposit, half the catering, the floral contract. All of it billed to my company, $500,000, give or take. Paid in installments, each one a quiet promise. She'll see me for who I am when the day comes. But that day was getting closer, and the promise felt thinner than paper. That night I called her, for the first time in months. She answered on the third ring, her voice polite but distant. "Hey, Dad." "Hey yourself," I said. "Got the invitation." A pause. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Why wouldn't I?" "I don't know, you're usually busy." I almost laughed. "Busy paying for it, you mean?" She went quiet, then softer. "Dad, please don't start." "I'm not starting, just talking. I just want the day to be perfect." "For who?" I asked. "You or the people you're trying to impress?" Her silence answered for her. "I'll be there," I said finally. "But you should remember something." "What's that?" "I might not belong in your world, but your world still runs on mine." Before she could respond, I ended the call. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I kept hearing her voice. Polite, polished, distant. The same tone she used when she spoke to clients, not family. So I went out to the garage. The old metal door groaned open and the smell of oil and sawdust hit me like a memory. I sat on the workbench looking at everything my hands had built. Shelves lined with tools, framed photos of completed projects, and one picture of her at 8 years old sitting on my shoulders, both of us covered in paint from fixing the old house. Her smile in that photo could light up a room. Back then, she didn't care if my hands were dirty. She just wanted to hold on tight. Now all she wanted was for me to stay out of the frame. I picked up the photo, wiped the dust from the glass, and whispered, "You'll understand one day." The next few weeks blurred into deadlines and deposits. The wedding planner called daily. Details, confirmations, final payments. She was professional, careful with her tone, but every conversation carried an undercurrent. "We're counting on you, Mr. Thomas." Every check I signed felt heavier than the last. My lawyer, Harold, called to confirm some documents. "You're sure you want to keep everything in your name?" he asked. "Yes. Even though she's listed as the client, she's the bride, Harold, not the buyer." He chuckled softly, then sighed. "You sound like a man preparing for a war." "I'm just making sure the battlefield's level." By the time the final week arrived, my signature was on every contract. The venue, catering, florist, lighting, the string quartet from New York, all of it. But the last payment, $340,000, remained pending. I could have sent it early. I didn't. Something in my gut told me to hold that check until I saw what kind of daughter I'd raised. The night before the wedding, I ironed my rented tuxedo. The fabric was cheap, stiff at the seams, but it'd do. I looked in the mirror, an old man in a borrowed suit, gray at the temples, lines etched deep by time and effort. But behind those lines was something solid, the kind of strength that doesn't show in photographs. I folded the check, slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket, and whispered to my reflection, "Let's see what honesty costs these days." The next morning, before heading out, I paused at the kitchen door and looked back once more. At the empty coffee cup, the faded invitation on the table, the photograph of a little girl who once believed her father could fix anything. I hoped for her sake I still could. The valet line outside the Ashford estate shimmered with money. Bentleys, Porsches, and one black Rolls that looked more like a mirror than a car. When my turn came, the kid in the red jacket looked at my Ford F-150 like it had wandered into the wrong movie. He tried to hide it, but I caught the flicker in his eyes, the small judgment that comes from someone who's never missed a payment in his life. I handed him the keys anyway. "Be gentle," I said. He smiled thinly, the way people do when they think they'll never see you again. Inside, the air smelled of orchids and champagne. Light poured through tall windows and splintered off the crystal chandeliers. Everything glittered, everything whispered money. And for the first time in my life, I understood how silence could be expensive. The planner spotted me at the door. Clipboard, headset, practiced warmth. "Mr. Thomas," she said, scanning her chart. "Welcome. You're at table 19. I nodded. She pointed toward the far end of the ballroom near the kitchen doors, the place where servers moved in and out with trays where the lighting didn't quite reach. Table 19, the outer edge of a perfect circle. When I reached my seat, I could see everything. 350 guests arranged like chess pieces, at the center a stage dressed in white roses, and there she was, my daughter, in a gown that looked spun from light itself. She moved through the crowd with a grace that felt rehearsed. Her laughter was soft, symmetrical. Every gesture calculated to look effortless. I raised my glass of water and watched her talk to the man beside her, the silver-haired stranger I'd seen in photographs. He stood with his hand on her back, the way fathers do when they're proud. When she turned toward me, for a split second, her eyes found mine. Recognition. Panic. Then a smile that erased both. She turned away, leaned toward the stranger, and said something that made him laugh. That was the moment I knew. Tonight I wasn't family. I was furniture. The guests near me were distant cousins, business acquaintances, a few people I hadn't seen since she was 10. They spoke about golf clubs, art auctions, interest rates. No one asked what I did for a living. Maybe they already knew. Maybe they didn't care. The quartet started playing and the planner dimmed the lights until the chandeliers glowed like moons. The announcer's voice rolled across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the bride and groom." Applause, cameras, laughter. They entered like royalty, hands intertwined, smiling for everyone but me. When the first course arrived, I noticed the servers whispering. They looked toward me, then at the head table, confusion on their faces. I realized they knew whose signature was on their paychecks. It wasn't the Whitmores or the new in-laws. It was mine. A strange kind of respect flickered there, quiet and unspoken. During the salad course, an older woman leaned over. "I'm sorry, dear," she said, "but aren't you the father of the bride?" "I was," I said softly. She blinked, unsure whether she'd misheard. Then she looked toward the head table, saw the silver-haired man laughing beside my daughter, and the color drained from her face. "Oh," she whispered, "I see." But she didn't. Not yet. The toasts began. The groom's father spoke first. Booming voice, polished humor, the confidence of a man who's never had to ask twice. He talked about legacy, family values, the union of two worlds. People clinked glasses. I took a sip of water that tasted like metal. When my daughter stood to speak, my chest tightened. Her voice was clear, steady, the kind of tone that comes from too many rehearsals. She thanked everyone, the planners, the guests, her new family. Then she gestured toward the stranger beside her. "And most of all," she said, "to the man who's been a guiding light in my life. Thank you, Dad." Applause thundered. That word, Dad, echoed through the hall, sharp as broken glass. I felt every syllable cut. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Just watched her raise her glass toward him, not once looking my way. The photographer snapped pictures, capturing lies that would live forever. When the applause died down, I excused myself and walked toward the hallway by the restrooms. Needed air, needed space. The planner found me there, nervous, whispering into her headset. "Mr. Thomas, everything okay?" Just needed a minute. Of course. Also, the venue manager wanted to confirm the final payment time, 9 p.m., correct? "Correct," I said. Her shoulders eased, but her eyes still studied me, sensing something she couldn't name. Back at my table, dessert plates had replaced dinner. Guests laughed louder now, drunk on comfort. But beneath the music, I could hear another rhythm, quiet, steady, patient. It was the ticking of my watch. 2 hours until 9. I reached into my jacket pocket and touched the folded check. $340,000. It felt warm from my body heat. It also felt like the last bit of leverage a father has when love turns into shame. I looked around the room, suits that cost more than my truck, jewelry that could pay someone's mortgage for a year, and thought about the crawl spaces, the broken pipes, the winters I spent fixing things for people who forgot my name the moment the leak stopped. Every dollar in that ballroom was built on hands like mine, hands like my father's before me, and tonight those hands were invisible. The band started another song, soft and slow. Couples filled the floor. My daughter danced with her new husband, her head resting on his shoulder. They looked perfect. Two people moving through a life they believed they'd built alone. I sat back, folded my hands and smiled. Because I finally understood what my role was. I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to watch, quietly, carefully, until the moment came when truth would demand its due. 9 o'clock wasn't far, and when it came, every light in that room would shine a little differently. There's a kind of quiet that only happens in expensive rooms. It's the sound of people pretending everything is perfect. The clinking of glasses, the soft scrape of silver on china, a symphony of denial. From table 19, I watched it all unfold. The glow, the laughter, the practiced grace. You'd never guess that every light in that ballroom was powered by a man no one wanted to see. When the servers cleared the dinner plates, I checked my watch. 8:15. 45 minutes left before the final payment came due. 45 minutes between a dream and a lesson. I thought about that check in my pocket, $340,000, and how love sometimes writes its own invoices. How every gift, every sacrifice, every silent moment eventually adds up to a number you can't ignore. My daughter was laughing with the photographer, her veil catching the light. She looked like a stranger dressed in someone I used to know, and yet a part of me still ached with pride. She was beautiful, confident, everything I ever wanted her to be. I just never thought being mine would be the one thing she'd trade away to get there. Across the room, the silver-haired man, her father, told a story that made the crowd laugh. The groom's family adored him. He fit. That was the point. He looked like the kind of man who belonged in a place like this. And me? I looked like the man who built it. A waiter passed by with champagne. I waved him over, took a glass, and held it up to the light. Tiny bubbles rose to the surface and burst. Small, perfect, temporary, I thought. That's what love becomes when respect disappears. The planner hovered near the edge of the room, glancing my way more than once. She knew who the client was. She'd seen the signatures. I could tell she was starting to worry. And maybe she should have been. My phone buzzed. A text from my daughter. "Dad, please don't talk to anyone about work tonight, please. No greeting, no thanks, just rules." I looked at the words until they blurred, then slid the phone back into my pocket. Because something had changed. The ache that had followed me all evening was cooling into something steadier, sharper. Not rage. Resolution. I thought of her mother, the nights she stayed up sorting receipts while I repaired old boilers in the basement, whispering, "She'll understand someday, Tom." And I realized, someday had arrived. 8:30, the band started a slow tune. Couples swayed on the dance floor, lost in soft light. I stayed seated, tracing a circle on the tablecloth with my finger. Every spin of that circle was another year of sacrifice. Private school, college tuition, the Manhattan apartment. Every dollar a promise that she'd remember who she came from. Every promise broken tonight. A man in a tailored navy suit sat down beside me. Didn't introduce himself, didn't need to. The groom's father. "Thomas, is it?" he said, his smile smooth as glass. "I wanted to personally thank you for coming. It means a lot to Victoria." "Does it?" I asked. "Of course, family is important to us." He sipped his wine. "She's spoken so fondly of her late father. You must have been close to him." The irony nearly made me laugh. Instead, I said, "Closer than you think." He chuckled politely, oblivious. "Well, enjoy yourself tonight. Everything's been taken care of." I watched him walk away, thinking, not yet, it hasn't. 8:45. 15 minutes left. The planner whispered to the venue manager. The staff started checking their watches. Even the band seemed to slow. I imagined the moment the clock struck 9. The contracts, the payments, the lights. How one missing signature could turn perfection into chaos. I wasn't planning revenge. Revenge is petty. This was something cleaner, a reminder. Because the truth about love is simple. You can't buy it, but you can sure as hell audit it. A cousin leaned over, voice soft. "She looks happy, doesn't she?" "She does," I said. "Let's hope she still does at 10. The music shifted again, louder now, faster, the kind that tries to drown conversation. People laughed, shouted, raised glasses, but I didn't hear any of it. All I heard was the ticking of the clock. 8:55. The manager approached, notebook in hand. "Mr. Thomas, she said quietly. Shall we expect the final transfer at 9? Yes, I said, expect it. She smiled, relieved, not realizing I'd answered her question but not her meaning. When she left, I sat back, letting the weight of the evening settle into me. It wasn't about money anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about something you can't invoice: respect, gratitude, truth. I looked around the ballroom one last time before the toast. The chandeliers, the flowers, the music, all of it shining on the surface, hollow underneath. I whispered to myself, all this, and still no one taught her what things cost. At exactly 9 p.m., the band cut out for the announcement. The groom's father rose, glass in hand, ready to give his grand speech. Guests leaned forward, cameras aimed. My daughter's smile brightened, practiced and perfect. I slipped my hand into my jacket and touched the folded check. The edges were soft from being handled too many times. I closed my fingers around it, felt the paper bend, and decided that before the night was over, everyone in that room was going to learn the real price tag of love. By the time the clock on the far wall touched 9, the air inside the ballroom felt charged, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. Laughter rolled through the crowd, but underneath it you could hear the hush of curiosity. Something was shifting, and the people who lived their lives by appearances were the first to sense it. The groom's father lifted his glass for a toast, his voice booming across the chandeliers. Family, he said, isn't just about blood. It's about values, integrity, legacy, and the traditions we pass down. Applause, polite smiles. Every word sounded rehearsed, carved from marble and ego. I sat at table 19, fingers resting on the folded check inside my jacket, and thought, legacy. Let's talk about that. From the corner of my eye, I saw Harold enter. Gray suit, briefcase in hand, eyes scanning the room until they found me. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, then made his way to a seat near the back. 15 years of business together had taught him when to talk and when to wait. Tonight he was waiting. The groom's father kept speaking, pausing for laughter that sounded more like obedience. He was halfway through some story about family honor when my phone buzzed again. A message from my daughter. Dad, please don't make this about you. I stared at the words for a long moment, then typed back nothing at all. Some things don't need replies. They need consequences. Harold reached my table during the applause. He placed his briefcase on the chair beside me, leaned in and whispered, everything's in here. Contracts, bank transfers, signed invoices, timestamps. You sure you want to go through with this? I looked at the head table. My daughter was smiling for the cameras, her hand resting lightly on her husband's arm, pretending her life was seamless. I've never been sure of anything, I said. Harold exhaled slowly. All right, when you're ready. He slid the briefcase under the table the way men used to slide revolvers in old movies. Quietly, deliberately, with the understanding that once it's opened, there's no going back. The speeches rolled on, predictable, shiny, hollow. Each one a eulogy for honesty. Guests clapped at all the right places, laughed when they were supposed to, and never looked too closely at the man sitting in the corner. But I could feel their curiosity growing. They'd begun to whisper. It always happens that way. Wealth can smell conflict long before it sees it. The venue manager, Claire, passed by my table. Mr. Thomas, she said softly, we just need verbal confirmation before we process the final payment. Verbal confirmation? Yes, sir. The system won't release funds without your approval. I smiled. Then let's hold off for now. Her brows knit together. Is there a problem? No problem, I said. Not yet. She hesitated, then nodded, professional mask slipping just enough to show the first spark of unease. Behind her, two assistants exchanged glances. They didn't know what was coming, but they could feel it. People who work in service always can. The band changed songs, something sentimental, polished for Instagram reels. The photographer moved in close, capturing the bride and groom feeding each other cake. Applause again, all surface, all show. And in the quiet between the flashes, I realized something. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's erasure. Hate still means you're seen. Erasure means you're invisible. And tonight my daughter had turned me into a ghost at my own story's ending. Harold cleared his throat quietly. It's now or never, Tom. I nodded, feeling my heartbeat steady. Not faster, steadier. That's the difference between anger and conviction. I took a slow sip of water, then pushed back my chair. The sound was small, but in a room like that, all glass and echoes, even small sounds travel far. A few heads turned. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked toward the front. The path from table 19 to the stage felt longer than it should have. Every footstep replayed a year of my life. The first job, the first truck, the first loan signed in faith, the first night I carried her sleeping from the couch to bed, the first time she called me Dad. By the time I reached the aisle, the groom's father was wrapping up his speech. And now please join me in raising your glasses to the man who taught Victoria what true character looks like. Her father, Mr. Morrison. Applause. Flashbulbs. My daughter's smile, bright and brittle, fixed on the wrong man. Harold stood up in the back, just enough for her to see him. Her smile faltered. The first crack in porcelain. I stopped beside the bandstand just at the edge of the light. The microphone sat unattended on its stand, waiting. I didn't plan to make a scene, but sometimes the truth doesn't give you a choice. I looked toward the planner. She was watching me now, headset frozen in her hand. Claire, the manager, had gone pale. Harold met my eyes from the back of the room and gave the smallest nod. A signal, a question, maybe both. I reached for the microphone. The music faltered, uncertain. The room turned toward me like a single living thing. And in that fragile silence, I felt everything. 26 years of sacrifice, love, shame, pride, all boiling down to a single moment when a father finally stopped apologizing for existing. I didn't speak yet. Not yet. The right words deserve quiet first. The microphone felt heavier than it should have, like it already knew what was about to happen. I turned it on. A soft hum filled the hall. Hundreds of eyes swung toward me, some confused, some curious, a few annoyed that a stranger had interrupted their perfect evening. The groom's father was still smiling, his hand frozen halfway in a gesture of charm. My daughter's eyes were wide. She mouthed my name once, a small sound that didn't make it past her lips. Evening, I said, my voice steady but low. Sorry to cut in. I just wanted to add a few words before we move on to dessert. A ripple of polite laughter passed through the crowd, the kind that says who invited him. I let it fade. I've been sitting back there at table 19 all night, I said. It's a good table, close to the kitchen. You can hear the real work being done. That got a few quiet chuckles, but mostly silence. Good. Silence tells you people are listening. I've heard a lot tonight about legacy, about family, about who built what. I looked toward the silver-haired man. He seems like a fine gentleman, the kind of man people like to photograph beside success. Then I looked at my daughter. She's done well for herself. I'm proud of that. Truly. But pride's a funny thing. It changes shape when people forget who stood behind them when the lights were off. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted in their seat. I went on. This wedding is beautiful. Every flower, every light, every song timed to perfection, and it should be. It cost $500,000. Gasps. The the kind of sound money makes when people realize it's been mentioned out loud. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folded check. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the last payment. The one that keeps all this running." My daughter whispered, "Dad, please don't," but it was too late for please. "I was asked not to talk about work tonight," I said. "But work is what built this evening. Work is what built her. 26 years of it. Late nights, broken bones, missed holidays, work that bought this dress, this haul, this moment." I could see the planner in the corner frozen. The venue manager had stopped the servers mid-tray. Even the band's instruments hung silent in their hands. I unfolded the check and looked at the numbers one last time. $340,000. Love written in ink. Then I tore it clean down the middle. The sound was small, but it carried, like paper screaming. "Payment canceled," I said softly. "Consider it a refund for forgetting who paid the deposit on your dreams." Cameras flashed. The groom's father shot to his feet, red rising in his face. "Sir, this is highly inappropriate." "No, sir," I said. "What's inappropriate is selling the illusion that integrity can be rented." I turned back to my daughter. "You can deny a name. You can rewrite a story. But truth has a way of showing up on the bill." Her mascara had started to run. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I didn't look away either. Behind me, Harold stepped forward, briefcase in hand. He placed it on the nearest table and opened it, pulling out copies of contracts, receipts, transfers. All with my signature, all dated, all proof. The room rippled with whispers. The venue manager approached the microphone stand. "Mr. Thomas," she said carefully, "do we have confirmation on payment?" "No," I said, "you don't." "Then we'll need to suspend service until balance is cleared." "Do what you must." She turned to her staff. In less than a minute, servers began wheeling carts out, lights dimming, music fading. The glamour peeled away like wallpaper in a damp room, and through it all I just stood there calm, still holding the torn halves of that check. People stared, some with sympathy, some with disgust. The groom's family looked around for someone to blame, but blame, like truth, has a direction, and tonight it pointed home. I laid the microphone gently on the stand. Then I looked at my daughter one last time. "I didn't come here to ruin your night," I said quietly. "I came to remind you who built it." Then I walked back toward the door, each step echoing louder than applause. The sound that followed was not silence. It was confusion, disbelief, the soft unraveling of a lie that had worn a tuxedo. People weren't sure whether to clap or to whisper. The band still held their instruments mid-air. Servers froze with trays half-tilted. The chandeliers hummed quietly, waiting for someone to tell them what mood they should reflect. I walked back toward table 19, each step measured, deliberate. The torn check was still warm in my hand, edges damp from sweat. When I reached my chair, I placed it on the white linen like a confession and sat down. The groom's father was the first to break the stillness. "This is ridiculous," he barked, voice sharp enough to crack glass. "This man's had too much to drink." I lifted my glass of water. "Just hydration, sir. Costs less than champagne, but it keeps you honest." Laughter scattered through the room, nervous, involuntary. He glared at me, then at my daughter, who sat pale and motionless, her lipstick trembling against the rim of her flute. She looked like she was trying to wake from a dream that no longer wanted her. The planner hurried toward the stage, headset pressed to her ear. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll excuse us for a moment." But the venue manager, Claire, cut her off. "Service is suspended until payment clears," she said firmly. Then to the staff, "Lights down, instruments off." And just like that, the fairy tale collapsed. Music stopped. Waiters rolled carts backward through the doors. Guests stood in confused clusters, their designer shoes whispering against marble floors. The illusion drained out of the room like air from a balloon. Someone whispered near the front, "Did he really pay for all this?" Another voice answered, "Every cent I heard." The rumors spread faster than the scent of spilled champagne. At the head table, the groom's mother rose, her pearls quivering. "This is an outrage," she snapped. "You can't just—" I met her eyes. "Ma'am, it's simple math. No payment, no party." Harold stepped forward quietly, his presence calm as ever. He handed the planner a neat folder, the contracts, the invoices, all of them signed by me. "Legally binding," he said. "Cancellation clause activated. Venue retains control until balance is resolved." The planner blinked at the papers as if reading a language she didn't know. Around us, guests began drifting toward the exits, slowly, awkwardly, like people leaving a movie that ended too soon. I watched my daughter stand. Her voice broke on the first word. "Dad, what have you done?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked around the half-dark room, the flowers wilting under heat lamps, the untouched cake, the mirrors reflecting people who didn't know where to look. Then I said softly, "Nothing, sweetheart. I just stopped paying for what wasn't mine." Her new husband stepped forward, anger hiding behind embarrassment. "You think this makes you look noble?" "No," I said, "it makes me visible." He scoffed. "You've humiliated her." I shook my head. "No. I've introduced her to the truth. It's overdue." I stood, took one last glance at the chandelier light pooling across the marble, and turned toward the doors. The planner tried to speak, something about arrangements, refunds, but her words faded behind me. By the time I reached the foyer, half the guests were already outside, calling drivers, folding shawls over shoulders. The night air hit me cold and clean. Somewhere behind me, I could still hear the music stutter back to life, someone trying to pretend nothing had happened. But the notes sounded thin now, fragile. Because once truth gets out, you can't turn it back into background noise. Harold joined me by the front steps, briefcase in hand. "You sure you're all right?" he asked. I nodded. "Better than I've been in years." He gave a small smile. "You did what most men only dream of." "Which is what?" "Stopped apologizing for being honest." I looked out at the long line of cars, headlights glowing like candles in the mist. "I didn't do it to hurt her," I said. "I did it so she'd finally see what real looks like." "Think she will?" "Maybe not tonight, but someday when the lights stop flattering her and the bills start coming due, she will." We walked to the edge of the drive. The valet brought my truck around, the same kid who'd looked at it with pity earlier. This time, he handed me the keys without meeting my eyes. Funny thing about respect, it usually shows up right after truth does. I climbed in, started the engine, and watched the mansion shrink in the rearview mirror. The laughter inside had turned to murmurs, then to silence. By the time I hit the main road, all that remained was the soft hum of tires and the quiet pulse of my heartbeat keeping time. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace, because the check might not have cleared, but the truth finally had. The drive home that night felt longer than it should have. The road stretched on for miles, empty and silver under the headlights. I didn't turn the radio on. I didn't need to. The echo of that torn check was still ringing in my head. Out the window, the moon hung low over the fields, quiet, indifferent. It reminded me of my daughter when she was a little girl, asleep in the passenger seat after her dance recitals. Back then, she'd hum soft tunes under her breath and ask, "Did I do okay, Dad?" I'd say, "You were perfect." And she'd smile, half dreaming, believing me. Now, driving through that same silence, I realized there was a kind of peace in truth, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered. The porch light flickered once and went out like it had waited just long enough for me to come home. I stepped inside, hung up my jacket, and set my keys on the counter. For a long time, I just stood there listening to the old pipes hum through the walls. The sound of my own handiwork still holding after all these years. It's strange, isn't it? You can build something to last, but people forget who built it. They only remember when it breaks. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the table, and stared at the space in front of me. No anger, no regret, just the kind of stillness that comes when a man has done exactly what he needed to do, even if the world calls it wrong. My phone buzzed. A message. "I hope you're proud of yourself." Her name on the screen looked foreign. I read it once, then again, then deleted it. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. I slept in my chair that night. When morning came, the light creeping through the blinds felt different, softer, honest. I made coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and let the chill air wash over me. Somewhere a neighbor's sprinkler hissed to life, and the smell of wet grass filled the air. Normal things. Real things. The kind you don't have to pretend about. By noon, the story had spread. I didn't need to look it up. Harold called to confirm it. "Half the internet's seen the video," he said. "Someone posted it before you even reached your truck." "I figured," I said. "Reporters are calling. Want me to handle it?" "Let them talk," I said. "I'm done doing the explaining." He paused. "She'll call, you know." "Maybe," I said, "maybe not." "She will." And then he hung up. The next day I went back to work. A flooded basement on 5th Street. An old couple who couldn't afford a contractor. While I worked, they brought me sandwiches and coffee, said they'd seen the clip online. The husband patted my shoulder. "Don't let them tell you you're wrong," he said. "I won't," I told him. But I didn't tell him the truth. I already didn't care what they thought. By the end of the week, my phone was full of messages. Some cruel, some kind, most curious. People love watching honesty when it costs someone else. They called me petty, proud, vindictive, and real, brave, righteous, all in the same breath. But the truth doesn't need defenders, it just needs time. One evening I sat by the window watching the light fade, and I thought about her. Where she might be. What she might be telling herself to make sense of it all. Part of me wished I could have softened the blow. But the rest of me knew that without that pain, she'd never understand what she'd thrown away. Love isn't about giving people what they want. It's about giving them what they need, even if what they need is a mirror. That night I walked out to the garage and looked at the old photograph again, her on my shoulders, both of us covered in paint. I smiled. Because even if she never spoke to me again, I'd still be the man who built the ground she walks on. And someday, when the lights of her world go dim, she'll remember who wired them to shine in the first place. The first call came from a journalist 3 days after the wedding. She said she wanted to hear my side. I told her there was no side, only a story, and I'd already lived it. She laughed politely, promised to quote me fairly, then wrote the kind of article that makes strangers pick sides about people they've never met. By the end of the week, my name was everywhere. Headlines, think pieces, opinion videos with thumbnails that froze my face mid-sentence. Some called me a hero. Others said I'd ruined my daughter's life out of pride. They argued about family, class, money, respect, as if truth could be debated by people who'd never had to buy it. My business phone rang non-stop. Half the callers wanted plumbing repairs. The other half wanted interviews. I took the first kind. Work keeps you grounded when the world starts lifting you up for the wrong reasons. At night I'd watch the news recaps, muted, captions running along the bottom. There she was in blurry clips from a phone camera. My daughter in her wedding gown, mascara streaked, lips trembling. I'd switch it off before they started talking about me. It's one thing to be misjudged. It's another to see your child's pain turned into content. By the second week, her husband's company had issued a statement, something about privacy, misunderstanding, family matters being resolved in due time. But the internet doesn't wait for due time. Rumors became stories, stories became headlines. His stock dipped, sponsors pulled out, clients vanished. Turns out people love moral drama more than profit margins. Harold called one morning, his tone part amusement, part warning. "You've become a symbol," he said. "For what?" "For accountability, and maybe for every working man who's ever been told he wasn't enough." "I didn't mean to be a symbol," I said. "Symbols never do," he replied. Still, it wasn't pride I felt, it was exhaustion. When truth starts trending, it loses its weight. I didn't want fame, I just wanted honesty to cost the same for everyone. Around that time she called. Her number appeared on my screen late one night, the kind of hour when people finally stop pretending to be strong. I answered on the third ring. Her voice was quiet, raw. "Why did you do it, Dad?" "Because you already did," I said. She didn't respond. I heard her breathing, soft, uneven. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said, "but I couldn't keep loving a version of me that didn't exist in your world." Silence, then. "You embarrassed me." "I warned you about pretending. Pretending always ends in embarrassment." She started to cry. The sound cut through me, same as it did when she was 5 and scraped her knee. Back then I could fix it with a Band-Aid. Now there wasn't enough tape in the world. She whispered, "It's all ruined." "No," I said softly. "Just real." And before she could reply, I hung up. Not out of cruelty, but because I'd already said everything that needed saying. The next morning, someone left flowers on my porch, white lilies, no note. I knew they were from her. Grief wrapped in apology. Life moved on as it always does. The gossip cooled, the stories faded, new scandals took their place. My business stayed busy. People trusted me more now, not less. Maybe honesty makes customers feel safe, even when it hurts. Every so often I'd see her face on a magazine in the checkout line. Older now, thinner, eyes quieter. Articles about resilience and moving forward. I'd flip through, never buying, just skimming the words she used to rebuild herself. She never mentioned me, but she didn't have to. Every paragraph about strength was built on what she'd learned the hard way. A few months later, Harold stopped by with some paperwork, finalizing the closure of the wedding contracts. He sat at my table, sipped his coffee, and smiled. "You know," he said, "sometimes doing the right thing looks wrong from the outside." "I stopped caring about the outside a long time ago," I said. He nodded, looking around my modest kitchen. "No gold chandeliers, no champagne," he said. "Just peace," I replied. "And peace," he said, "is the only wealth that holds its value." That night I took a walk through town. Autumn leaves skittered across the sidewalks. A few people recognized me, nodded respectfully, said, "You did what any father would have done." But I knew better. Not every father would. Some debts stay unpaid because truth costs too much to spend. When I got home, I stood on the porch and looked up at the stars. They were small but stubborn, still shining, even after everything. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to forgiveness. Not for her, for myself. Winter came early that year. Frost traced the edges of my windows before Thanksgiving, and the air smelled of wood smoke and stillness. Work slowed as it always did. Pipes froze, heaters failed, and I found comfort in fixing what could be fixed. That's the thing about honest labor. It reminds you that broken doesn't mean finished. It just means you've got work to do. Most nights I'd come home to silence. Sometimes I'd catch myself setting 2 plates on the table out of habit, then quietly putting one back. Funny how habits remember what the heart tries to forget. It had been nearly 5 months since the wedding. The noise around it had faded like ripples finally settling on still water. The world had moved on, but I could still feel the weight of it. Like a scar under a shirt, hidden but never gone. One evening, as I was closing the shop, headlights swept across the window. A black sedan idled outside. For a moment I thought it was another reporter. Then the passenger door opened and she stepped out. My daughter. No makeup, no diamond rings, no polished smile. Just a wool coat buttoned wrong at the top and eyes that looked older than they should. She hesitated in the doorway before saying my name. Not Dad, not Father, just Thomas. Her voice cracked on it, and for a second she looked 12 again. I didn't say anything. I just nodded toward the space heater humming in the corner. She came in, sat on the same stool she used to spin on as a child while I worked on pipes. We sat in the hum of that old shop, saying nothing. Finally, she whispered, "I lost everything." I kept my eyes on the workbench. "Everything's a big word." "The company dropped him," she said. "His family won't speak to us. I moved out last month." I nodded, still quiet. She looked at her hands. "I wanted to call you sooner, but shame's heavier than silence," I said softly. She nodded, tears catching in her lashes. "I told myself you'd never forgive me." I set the wrench down, wiped my hands, and turned to her. "I already did," I said. "The night I tore that check, I forgave both of us." She frowned, not understanding. "I forgave you for forgetting," I said, "and I forgave myself for waiting too long to remind you." Her lips trembled. "You hate what I became." I shook my head. "No, I hate what pretending made you forget. There's a difference." For the first time in years, she looked at me, really looked. Not the way people glance at something uncomfortable, but like she was trying to find the person she used to know. I could see the girl she'd been behind those tired eyes, and I realized something. The world hadn't hardened her. It had hollowed her out. She'd built her life like a mansion with no foundation. All I'd done was make her look at the cracks. "I don't have much," she said. "I've been looking for work." "What kind?" "Anything," she whispered. "I just need a place to start." I nodded slowly. "You remember how to use a wrench?" She gave a small, wet laugh. "I remember you never let me near one." "That was then," I said. "Now I could use the help." Her face broke into something small but real, half a smile, half relief. For the first time, she didn't look above me, she looked beside me. We locked up the shop and walked to the truck. Snow had started to fall, soft, soundless flakes that disappeared as soon as they landed. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Mom would have loved this." "She would have," I said. "And she would have told me I deserved everything that happened." "No," I said gently, "she would have told you to start over." When we reached the truck, she hesitated by the door. "Dad," she said quietly, testing the word again, fragile but alive. I met her eyes. "Yeah. I don't know how to thank you." "You just did." We drove in silence, not the kind filled with distance, the kind filled with peace. The world outside blurred into white and gray, and for once neither of us needed to look back. Some debts can't be paid with money, only with humility, only with truth. And sometimes the cost of pretending is everything you ever thought was real. By spring, the snow was gone, and the shop smelled of sawdust and coffee again. The mornings came earlier, full of sunlight that crept through the cracked window panes. Most days started the same way now, 2 mugs on the counter, one slightly chipped, one new. She showed up at dawn, always a little nervous but always on time. I never asked where she was living. Some questions don't help the healing. At first she just watched. I'd be under a sink or tracing wiring along a wall while she stood by the toolbox, hands shoved in her coat pockets. Then one day she said, "Hand me the wrench." And just like that, we started building something neither of us could name. We worked in silence mostly. The good kind. The kind that fixes instead of hides. She learned fast the way she used to learn everything. Sometimes I'd catch her wiping her palms on her jeans, a habit she must have picked up from me. That simple, careless motion felt like forgiveness. One afternoon, while we were replacing a cracked water line, she said, "You know, I thought money meant safety." "It does," I said, "but only when it's honest." She smiled faintly. "Guess I learned that the expensive way." Most people do. When the job was done, she wrote up the invoice herself. Neat handwriting, no typos. Then she looked at me and said, "Feels good earning something." "Feels better keeping it," I said, and she laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years. Not polished, not posed, just hers. Week by week, the town stopped whispering. We fixed pipes, patched walls, painted old rooms that smelled of dust and memory. People noticed how she treated them, respectful, humble, quick to listen. Word spread the way good things do. Quietly. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hardware store, she handed me a small envelope. The paper was plain, no gold edges, no calligraphy. Inside was a card that said simply, "You're invited." I looked up at her. "It's my way of making things right," she said. "I'm opening a community repair program. For folks who can't afford big contractors, I want you to run it with me." I turned the card over. There was no RSVP date, just her signature. Not the polished one from glossy invitations, just her handwriting the way it used to be on school notes and thank you cards to her mother. "Will you come?" she asked. I smiled. "I've been here the whole time." That night we stayed late in the shop, cleaning tools, sorting screws, letting the quiet settle. Through the open door came the sound of crickets and far-off laughter from the main street. The same town that once looked too small for her dreams now felt exactly the right size. She stood by the window, light catching her hair. "You think Mom would be proud?" she asked. I took a breath. I think she's finally resting. When we locked up, she slipped her arm through mine, the way she used to when she was little. We walked to the truck under a sky full of patient stars. No cameras, no chandeliers, no applause, just the rhythm of our steps and the promise of tomorrow. The world will forget the headlines, people always do. But somewhere between the workbench and the quiet of that night, a daughter found her father again. And a father found the peace he'd been building for decades. That was the real invitation all along. If this story moved you to don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell icon, so you never miss a story that reminds us what truth, love, and forgiveness really cost. Because sometimes, the hardest lessons make the most powerful stories.